We have now a little bit of data to maybe answer the question, could disproportionate Republican COVID deaths have flipped any particular seats in the 2022 midterms? Now, let me reset this for you because we've talked about this probably for a year or more, but now we're really in the thick of it because we now have most of the results of the 2022 midterms. We know that more Republicans than Democrats died of COVID. We don't know exactly to what degree or by how much, but we know that this is a result of early on in the pandemic, Republicans were less likely to heed public safety guidelines than were Democrats. Therefore, they got more COVID. And as a function of that, more of them died. In the post-vaccine era, uptake of vaccines was lower among Republicans than it was among Democrats. And as a result of that, more Republicans died of COVID, generally speaking. And so the question of whether this impacted the election results is really a mathematical question. First, you've got to figure out to what degree were Republicans dying of COVID more than Democrats. It seems like now it's twice as much. So we could call it 2-1. You could zoom out and say, OK, twice as much means roughly 2/3 of the COVID deaths were Republicans. 1/3 of the COVID deaths were Democrats. Got about 1 million deaths. OK, so again, we're very much zooming out. When a 12-year-old dies, you don't assign a party affiliation to that. Right. But we're speaking super generally. Out of 1 million, you would say, well, that's like 666,000 Republican deaths, 333,000 Democratic deaths. Again, these aren't real numbers because you've also got non-voters in there and kids, et cetera. That means that the gap means about 333,000 more Republicans than Democrats died, assuming everybody is a voter and is an adult. So then you've got to figure out, of that 333,000 gap, are there any particular districts where the gap alone, or any particular states for statewide Senate and gubernatorial elections, where that death difference alone could have flipped a seat? We don't really know the answer yet, but it's increasingly being studied. There is actually, Vice wrote this up, and they are not the authors of the study, but we'll link to this article. The study is called Excess Death Rates for Republicans and Democrats During the COVID-19 Pandemic. And they looked at death records, they looked at voter registration, and they said, what is the link here between political affiliation, COVID deaths, and the impact on the midterms? Now, I am going to come out and right up front say a couple different things. It is completely possible that the margins here were between Republican and Democratic deaths, in particular congressional districts, for example, weren't actually big enough to really flip any elections. Maybe they were, maybe they were not. There are some who are saying that it is just filthy to even be asking this question. I completely disagree with that. You're not making light of anything by, on top of all of the obvious personal and family tragedy that are COVID deaths, to ask the political question and say, could this have shaped the electorate in 2022? It's a completely reasonable question to ask. So don't be swayed by the Republicans who are turning up their noses and saying, how offensive to even ask the question. There's really nothing wrong with asking the question. The next part of this is, it would be interesting to actually get some specific numbers. You know, in the lead up to 2022, I used an example from Florida's last gubernatorial election. And in Florida's last gubernatorial election, the margin between Ron DeSantis and then Democratic candidate Andrew Gillum was very small. And based on that margin, the disproportionate Republican COVID deaths in Florida could have made a difference. But that was in the last election. The margin was so big in DeSantis defeating Charlie Crist last week that the COVID deaths would not make a difference. It was a 19-point win for Ron DeSantis. So the theoretical example I gave about Florida from the previous election, it really doesn't apply because the margin was so big. So generally speaking, even if there were no specific races that depended on the partisan split in COVID deaths, this may become a larger component of Republican demographics related to vaccines beyond COVID. Given the growing anti-vaccine sentiment that has developed in the Republican Party since COVID, more broadly, we might actually start to see this, particularly over time, be a factor. We've said before, there are demographic changes happening in Texas, where Texas is becoming bluer as a result of demographic changes. There may also be changes to the electorate forced in by anti-vaccine sentiment. It shouldn't come as a huge shock that this is sort of the conclusion to what has been, quite frankly, decades of Republicans increasingly denying science, increasingly telling themselves scientists are just sort of like liberal professors. You can ignore everything they say and bring your own opinion, and your own opinion is just as valid as theirs. Seeing that grow for decades should then not make us surprised now at what we are seeing. At some point, we will probably get a more specific answer. Was there any particular race that arguably was flipped by disproportionate Republican COVID deaths? We don't have the answer right now, but it is being studied.